Welcome back to Bread Theory. This is my second stream of the day, and I think this is the first time in a while that I've done two in a single day. But I had some extra time after work, so here we are again, and we're going to continue on with our listening to the audiobook of Alexander Berkman's "What Is Communist Anarchism," also known as the ABC of Anarchism. Published under several different titles for some reason. I don't quite know the entire backstory of that, but there you have it. So in the last couple of chapters, Berkman has been laying out his experience with the Russian Revolution, the October Revolution. He started with the February Revolution, which led to an interim government, kind of a what you might call a liberal democracy. And unsatisfied with that, the Bolsheviks led their own revolution in October of that same year. And so now we are into that revolution, and he's going to talk about in this chapter. The title of this chapter is Revolution and Dictatorship. And the next one after that, we're going to do two chapters tonight because this one's pretty short. The one after that is also about dictatorship. So it sounds like Berkman is not too impressed with the Bolsheviks and what they put together. Before we get to that, though, I just wanted to mention one thing. I didn't have time. I just did my State of the Stream address. It's my 1 year anniversary this last Sunday of streaming on Twitch and being online in general, putting out content. And the one thing I didn't get to was a project that I'm working on Facebook. Now, Facebook is not a great place for leftists. It is mostly full of reactionary, middle-aged people who are comfortable and don't really have any interest in any sort of revolutionary politics. But there are some corners, and I like to think that I've carved out a nice little corner. I have a couple of groups, Left Pod Posting and Left Signal Boost. And each of those groups has a page attached to them. And what I'm trying to do with each of those pages is create a streamer and video creator and podcast creator collective. So that, in fact, right now you may be watching from the LSB TV site on Facebook because I stream from that page, and three more creators also stream to the same page. So the idea is to kind of pool our resources, pool our audiences, aggregate all of our content into one spot so that people can more easily find our work and the work of other great creators. And so if you go to facebook.com/leftsignalboost, I'm going to keep that link up on the screen for this whole stream. You can go there and find our LSB TV partner program. And basically, if you are a leftist content creator, if you do live streams or videos, and you want to reach more people, this is definitely an avenue that you should think about pursuing. We have over 1,000 followers at this point, and we seem to be growing every day, little by little. And so for especially people just starting out, this could be a really big opportunity to reach a whole big audience of people that are looking to consume your sort of content right now. So already we have 4 members in the partnership program. Let me expand out. I don't know why it's not letting me expand it out. Okay. Whoops. So far, there's, of course, this stream, Bread Theory. We also have For We Are Many. We have the Poor Pearl's Almanac, which, so first, For We Are Many does a bunch of different things. They do current events every week, and they also do readings of leftist literature, much like I do. And they also do interviews as well. So that's For We Are Many. And then we have the Poor Pearl's Almanac, which talks more about homesteading and permaculture and just kind of building up social, offline social networks in case, things go badly and in case the U.S. empire falls. And it will at some point. Every empire does. But it's the idea of becoming more locally self-reliant and having a lighter impact on nature. Hey, did you want to join too? Yes. All right. Amanda's going to join us again tonight. And then our newest partner is The Mind of a Skeptical Leftist, which is a great podcast. And also, they do live streaming and they do all sorts of content. They come from multiple tendencies, both anarchist and communist and socialist, all those different leftist schools of thought. So we have that one too. So we all just stream to this same page. And that way we can kind of help each other out and help our influence grow. So you got a comment coming in. Yeah, For We Men is a great group. Facebook blocks a lot of people and stuff. Yeah, Facebook is not a great organization, but we're trying to make it better. We're trying to do better things on it. We're trying to use it to do better things. We'll put it that way.
Facebook needs their timeout.
Yeah.
I kind of go on a Facebook timeout.
So anyway, if you are interested in that sort of thing, all you have to do is go to that facebook.com/left signal boost and go to the LSB TV partner program, and under that pinned post, just leave a link to your content, and if we say, oh yeah, okay, it's leftist stuff, then we'll accept you into the program. And then once you're in, there's no obligations. It's just another resource provided to you. So you don't have to post any certain number of times to stay in the collective. You don't have to have we don't have any control, or we would never take any sort of control over your the way that you run your show. This is all just to help each other out by putting the content in one spot. And of course, if you ever change your mind, you want to take your stuff off, that's totally up to you. No one can say anything about that. We're not about control at all. We're about helping one another out through just a mutual aiding of each other's audiences and advertising and various resources that it takes to put out and promote video and live stream content. Let me move the camera over so you'll be in frame too here.
No.
Say hi, Amanda.
No. He's getting high.
You ready to hear some more about the Russian Revolution?
S'mores?
S'mores. Yeah, we're gonna give you s'mores.
Don't say that. I want macaroni and cheese tomorrow. BT dubs.
Good to know. I will keep that in mind. I'm the cook in our household.
Yeah.
I cook most of the meals.
Gender roles. Gender normative roles are for suckers.
Well, except for you do a lot of the cleaning of like floors and the bathroom and stuff like that. So, it just works out. But we share all the chores pretty evenly, I'd say. All right. So let's get into Alexander Berkman's What is Communist Anarchism, Revolution, and Dictatorship? Did you have anything else you wanted to say before we get going? Let me move the mic over for you.
Well, I'm on my own leftism journey. I feel like I have finally meandered out of the socialist box and I'm moving further. I don't really know yet what that looks like for me. There's some things that I still feel like I don't really understand very well yet, but...
Sure. Anything come to mind?
Well, how more people aren't on this side is one thing that I don't understand, because it's such a benefit to all. Like,
it's about us all doing better together, yeah.
There's a lot of power struggle.
Among the left or
No.
between the left and other groups?
Between the left and other groups.
Yeah,
because I feel like other groups are very much into this, like, you can do it by yourself, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and I'm like, suck a lemon.
It's kind of funny how we've had that as kind of our unofficial country motto for time immemorial, since the beginning of the country and probably before.
It's just
and with all that pulling on bootstraps, there's still people
laying on the ground
struggling. Yeah, there's people that can't get up on their own. It's kind of funny how that works.
I mean, really, I feel like a lot of people kind of dig their heels in, and it's like there's no well, what about all these people that are just gonna stop working and stop doing stuff and blah 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 blah? Like, you know what?
People lack imagination.
Honestly, though, I think some people might take a damn break for a year or two.
And that's
fine. That's fine, because the system that we have in place currently with PTO and things like that, It is not good. It is not healthy. We're wearing people out.
Well, imagine too if we had universal health care that included mental health. A lot of people could benefit from taking a month or two and just kind of working on themselves, maybe even a year. Work out your
Yeah.
stuff so you can,
Function better. Live your
yeah, be
best
your best
life.
version of yourself and contribute the most of what you want to contribute to society. But it's funny too. You mentioned people are always like, oh, people won't work if you give them everything. Oh, you have to coerce them into working. Every single one of those people that say that, all you have to do is ask them, what would you do if you never had to worry about money again? I've done this several times with people. It always is the same answer. They give you an answer, and it's not nothing. It's not, I would sit on my ass and play video games. It's not, I would just, watch TV all day or sleep or whatever.
Hmm.
They always have an answer of what they would do. I would garden more. I would, volunteer.
There
I,
might be like a personal threshold too. Like they could sit at home for a little bit.
well, sure, but
And then, but then they'd get bored.
yeah,
And then
and
it'd be
most
like,
people
I
would.
need to find
Most people
something
actually
to
like
do.
to do stuff, and that's the point. It's strange that they think they're so unique, and yet every time I've talked to someone about this, they've come with the same answer. They have something that they would do whether or not they were getting paid for it. They would love
Right.
doing it. So why assume that you're so different than everyone else?
Because people, and that's another problem with this country. This is like individual has been pounded into our heads so much, so like deeply for some people. Like I don't. I'm getting off. I'm getting off track. I'm getting off track.
So James, you say you would hike the forest to not work? I mean, that's cool.
But that's a job, right, James? Like you could potentially out while you're hiking these forests make some sort of guide so that someone else who maybe wants to
Or,
do the same thing you did,
or be a ranger, a
yeah,
park ranger.
right, and help people that come out into the woods. Because like for me, I think hiking is fun, but I would rather have a map and
Or
have an
just
idea of where I'm going or what to avoid so that I don't get hurt or stuck or whatever.
sure.
Like,
Yeah, there's plenty of things that you could do, and are you gonna? I assume you're gonna come back into towns for food, but maybe not. Maybe you just forage and live on your own off of what you can get. And
but it's
I
your
mean, right. And
choice.
what's really so bad about that? I mean, it it the big boogeyman that they always throw up there is all the dregs of society, the so-called dregs, who would just pull everything down by taking, and never giving back. And there's so much wrong with that narrative, and not least of which, there are tons of jobs, by David Graeber's estimation, when he did his book Bullshit Jobs, and he researched and did wide surveys of people. By his research, up to 40% of jobs are absolutely meaningless. They provide nothing to the world, and they could go away. Entire industries, the health insurance industry,
Trash.
absolutely worthless. If we had universal health care, wouldn't exist. That day, all those jobs would be gone. And think of how freeing that would be. It's not as though that there would be less money in the economy because people are still getting health care.
Hmm.
And that would free up so many people to do other stuff. The point is, we could be paying all of these people to just stay home, and it would be a benefit to their life, and it would be a benefit to the economy, to society, to everybody.
Hmm.
Even if they weren't, even if they didn't have it, even if they just spent money, that still keeps the economy going. That still can build community connections. Um,
I
you say
think,
possibly getting hurt adds to the adventure.
but you could get seen and you wouldn't have to worry about how much it would cost. You could just go and they
Right.
would take care of you.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be
Wouldn't it be
like,
better to hike if you knew that if you did get hurt and people found you that you could be taken to a hospital and not be in debt the rest of your life for it? Sounds cool to me.
another thing that just popped into my head, and I'm sorry for sidetracking again, but
Oh, that's
like,
fine.
so if I think about art, okay, background. I have a bachelor's degree in art, okay? Minor in art history, art was my jam. And I think some of the best art that I've ever seen in my 37 years has been art that comes from pain and experiences, right?
Hmm.
And so far, the world has been a really painful place with a lot of negative experiences, which has created some really beautiful things. But then if people are having their baseline needs met
Hmm.
and not struggling in the same sort of way, would that change art?
It would change it. I don't think
But like,
art's not going to go away for
but
sure, but
what would happen to it? Like, you know what I mean? Do you get what I'm saying?
yeah,
Like
for sure.
the shift.
It would be a shift.
Like, I mean, obviously, like art therapy and things like that are really
Mhm.
powerful tools, but I
Yeah,
just,
I mean, there's the overstatement that all art comes from suffering, and I think that's going too far. There's plenty of great art that comes from being struck by something that's beautiful, um, wanting to explore emotions that are not dark. There's plenty of great art that comes from that too. So,
yeah, but in order to experience one, you have to experience the other.
to a certain extent, sure, but
Right.
it's not as though you have to go through the worst thing humanly imaginable in order to appreciate the good times.
True. I'm just,
I mean, yeah, okay. So the thing is, even
but
if
then,
people's baseline needs are met, there will still be struggles. There will still be conflict as well. It's just not going to be the same survival based stuff. So you're not going to see, you wouldn't see as much art exploring that. I mean, that's assuming that
I,
it happened at the same time all around the world. So, I mean, if it just happened in the US, you might be able to still see it. You definitely would still see it in other countries. Um, but yeah,
I know.
you.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna change the subject. So if you had more to say about that,
Well, it's okay. I can walk away from it.
well, you had mentioned earlier you don't know why these ideas are not more popular in the U.S. And I think there's a lot of answers to that. Part of the answer is definitely our educational system. By attempting to be neutral and not saying one thing is better than another.
I feel like they're pushing though. They're really like, at least in the northern states, where I think there's some progress
Progress,
coming. They're
yes, but it's
trying.
all within the band of capitalism still.
Oh yeah, because we don't
You're
want anyone to get butt hurt or piss off a donor
right,
or
right.
someone else whose boots we lick.
So by trying to be neutral, they're setting their center point roughly in between Democrat and Republican. Right? And
Okay, I
maybe
follow
skewed more
now.
towards the left side of that, just because education tends to be about ideas and opening your mind and stuff like that, and those are, for better or worse, uh, things that people on the left side tend to gravitate towards. But regardless, by setting their neutral point there, then they're kind of endorsing things as they are. And so seriously considering too great of a change in either direction is just kind of beyond the bounds of what any school would do if it wanted to keep its air of impartiality. So you may read 1984, but you're not looking too much into George Orwell's life or what he believed because he was a lifelong socialist. Um, you may be reading Animal Farm, but you're not really going to dive too deeply into, you know, you're not going to read State and Revolution along with Animal Farm. You're not going to see what the ideal was versus how one man saw it play out.
Or it's Black History Month, and we're just talking about a whole bunch of really cool black people
Sure.
for this month, but you really don't see them much May through
Well, I mean,
January,
what
like,
it comes down to
or
is
not May.
basically
You know what I mean?
a white feminist point of view. So the idea that the main thing we need is inclusion in these different areas and awareness of various groups' struggles and stuff like that. And that's what is enough. But that form of feminism just kind of gives capitalism a pass. It wants women in the workplace so that they can compete with men in a capitalist system. It's still, I mean, just because you're rich now as a woman doesn't mean you're going to not be exploiting the workers below you. Doesn't mean you're not going to have a nanny, you
Or
know,
that you're being exploited because
or
you
that you're
can
being
get
exploited
paid
too.
less to do the same job a
Well,
man
okay,
does with all the same
Fair enough, but white feminism would argue that that's what we should focus on is the pay gap rather than this entire chunk of society that is struggling all the time just to make ends meet, just to have stability, that sort of thing. So
I mean, men should be in schools more. There should be more men in care positions.
sure,
There
sure,
shouldn't be this, like,
but again, that's just
if you work
representation.
with kids, you're a Pedialyte drinker. It's like, no, 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 no. That's not.
But anyway, but
All
still,
right.
that's just the representation part, which are important things as well. But it's fiddling with the upper layers rather than getting to the root of the problem. And that was the main focus of a book I read recently by Bell Hooks. It was called Feminism Is for Everybody, and she went through the various waves of feminism, and you could see the progression and how we've gotten to the point of white feminism being more or less accepted as okay by you know at least mass pop culture, but that it doesn't go far enough because it doesn't address capitalism and its inherent inequalities and its inherent tendency to leave most of the people behind for the benefit of the few. So that's a good book. I highly recommend that. Feminism is for Everybody, Bell Hooks. Good one. Probably not one we're ever going to be able to cover because it's too recent. So any audiobook version of it would be a paid one, like the one that I listened to. So unfortunately, we won't be able to do that. But we definitely will be covering essays by Bell Hooks in the future. I found a few good ones. That'll be like, one episode readings, that sort of thing. She's got a lot of good stuff to say, and she has a lot of talks out there as well. We'll be exploring all kinds of people coming up as we start to move into phase 2 of this stream. But we're not quite there yet. We have a little bit more theory to cover. We're going to go over some essays from like Mao and Luxembourg and a few Malatesta, Emma Goldman, people like that. We're going to get some of the classics. Going to get a broader base in the classics of leftist thought, and then we'll cap it off with the big one, Marx's Kapital.
Capital.
Yep, Das Kapital, which I bet you could say with a better German accent than me.
Das Kapitel.
Das Kapital?
Kapitel.
Kapital? Ooh, that's a difficult word to say.
Kapitel.
Lovely language, that. I'm sorry. Goodness. Kapital. Anyway,
Kapitel.
that'll be the big capstone for the classic section of this stream, and then we'll move into some more modern stuff.
Hi,
Natalie, good to have
Natalie.
you. Good to see you. But so yeah, tonight let's get into Alexander Berkman, and he's gonna have some more thoughts about the Russian Revolution in his "What is Communist Anarchism?" And as always, we're using Audible Anarchist, really great resource, tons of free audiobooks on YouTube.
Production was made in collaboration with Audible Anarchist.
What? Oh, you need your headphones, of course.
Chapter 17: Revolution and Dictatorship. Why?
Okay, hold on.
Because the revolution and the Bolshevik dictatorship were things of an entirely different and even opposite nature. And here is where most people make the greatest mistake in confusing the Russian Revolution with the Communist Party and speaking of them as if they were one and the same, which emphatically they are not. This will become clear to us if we compare the aims of the revolution with the ends sought by the Bolsheviki. The revolution was a mighty uprising against oppression and misery. It voiced the longing of the masses for justice and liberty. It attempted to do away with everything that kept man in subjugation, made him a slave and a beast of burden. The revolution tried to establish new forms of life, conditions of real equality and brotherhood. We have already seen that the revolution was not a superficial change, that it did not stop with the February events. The Tsar had been abolished, and the power of the autocracy broken, but the result was only another form of government. The economic and social conditions remained the same, yet it was just those that the people meant to change. That is why the October Revolution took place. Its purpose was to rebuild life altogether on new social foundations. How was it to be rebuilt? It is evident that taking Romanov out of the Kremlin palace and putting Lenin in his place would not do it. Something more was necessary. It was necessary to give the soil to the peasant, to put the factories in the hands of the workers and their labor organizations. In short, it was the aim of October to afford the people an opportunity to make use of the political freedom won in February. That is the way the masses sized up the situation, and they acted upon it. They began to apply liberty to their needs. They wanted peace, so they stopped the war first of all. It was months later that the Bolshevik government signed the Brest-Litovsk Treaty and concluded an official peace with Germany. But so far as the Russian armies were concerned, the war was at an end long before, without diplomatic negotiations. Trotsky frankly admits this in his work on the revolution. The Russian workers and peasants, temporarily in soldiers' uniforms, had taken matters into their own hands and terminated the war by leaving the fronts. Similarly did the peasantry and the proletariat act in solving industrial and agrarian problems. While the provisional government was still discussing land reforms, the masses themselves acted through local councils and Soviets. The peasants took the land they needed and began cultivating it. With simple common sense and inherent popular justice, they settled the agrarian problem over which the politicians and lawgivers had been going in circles for many decades without result. The Bolsheviki, when they came to power, legalized what the peasants had already accomplished without asking anybody's permission. In like manner, did the worker Soviets start to solve the industrial problem by taking over the factories and mines and managing them for the general benefit instead of for the profit of the owners. That was actual abolition of capitalism and wage slavery long before the Bolshevik government declared capitalist ownership legally at an end. All the other problems of everyday life the revolution was similarly solving by the practical and direct activity of the masses themselves.
Any thoughts so far?
Not yet.
Okay. So what I'm hearing him say is that as this October Revolution got underway, the people were really doing it themselves. You know, they were on board, and they were making great changes within their company, within their new country. But it sounds like he believes that the elites, the Bolsheviki, had different designs. Would you say that's fair?
Cooperative organizations brought city and village together for the exchange of products. House committees looked after the housing question. Street and district committees were organized for the safety of the city. And other voluntary bodies were formed for the defense of people's interests and of the revolution. The requirements of the situation directed the efforts of the masses. The liberty of action brought initiative into play, and the wants of the people shaped their creative capacities to the needs of the hour. These collective activities constituted the revolution. They were the revolution, for the revolution is not some vague thing without definite meaning and purpose, nor does it signify the political scene shifting or new legislation. The actual revolution took place neither in February nor in October, but between those months. It consisted in the free play and interplay of the revolutionary energies and efforts of the people. An independent, popular initiative and creative work inspired by the common need and mutual interests.
I like that. So he's saying that the revolution is not so much a physical action of just toppling the current regime. It is a change that takes place in the hearts of people and them working together. That's what the revolution is, which means that the revolution never really has an end to it. It's the idea of permanent revolution. Okay.
That was the spirit and tendency of the great economic and social upheaval in Russia. It solved problems as they arose on the basis of liberty and free cooperation. This process of the revolution was stopped in its development by the Communist Party seizing political power and constituting itself a new government. We have just seen what the aim of the revolution was. We know what the masses of Russia wanted and what means they used to achieve it. The objectives of the Bolsheviki as a political party, on the other hand, were of an entirely different nature. As frankly admitted by themselves, their immediate goal was a dictatorship, that is, the formation of a popular Bolshevik state which should direct the life and activities of the country according to the views and theories of the Communist Party. To give due credit to the Bolsheviki, let me say right here that there was never any political party more devoted to its cause, more wholehearted in its efforts to advance it, more determined and energetic in the achievement of its purposes. But those purposes were entirely foreign to the revolution and opposed to its real needs. They were, in fact, so contrary to the spirit and aims of the revolution that their achievement meant the destruction of the revolution itself. No doubt the Bolsheviki really thought that only by means of their dictatorship could Russia be converted into a socialist paradise for worker and farmer. Indeed, as Marxists, they could not see things in any other way. Believers in an all-powerful state, they had no confidence in the people. They had no faith in the initiative and creative ability of the toilers. They distrusted them as a multicolored mob, which has to be forced into liberty. They agreed with the cynical maxim of Rousseau that the masses can only be made free by compulsion. Proletarian compulsion, in all its forms, wrote Bukharin, the foremost communist theoretician, beginning with a summary execution and ending with compulsory labor, however paradoxical it may sound, a method of reworking the human material of the capitalistic epoch into communist humanity. That was the Bolshevik Gospel. It was the attitude of a party that believed the revolution could be run by the orders of a central committee. What followed was the logical outcome of the Bolshevik idea. Claiming that only the dictatorship of their party could properly conduct the revolution, they bent all energies to secure that dictatorship. It meant that they had to take things exclusively into their own hands, to have the designs of the party accomplished at any cost. We need not go into the details and schemes and political manipulations of those days, which finally resulted in the Communist Party gaining the upper hand. The most important point is that the Bolsheviki did contrive to carry out their plans within a few months after the October Revolution. By April 1918, they were in control of the entire government. By taking advantage of the excitement of the revolutionary days and the inevitable confusion, they exploited the situation for their own objects. They used the political differences to rouse fierce party passions, resorted to every means to denounce their opponents as enemies of the people, branded them counter-revolutionists, and finally succeeded in damning them in the eyes of the workers and soldiers. Declaring that the revolution must be protected against those alleged enemies, they were enabled to proclaim their own dictatorship. In the name of saving the revolution, they began eliminating all other revolutionary elements, non-Bolshevik, from positions of influence.
And the part that he's getting into now, the idea that they were very extreme in the way they cracked down on anyone who they saw as threats to the revolution. This is a sticking point for a lot of anarchists who like to take on the actions of or the oppression of the past for themselves, and be like, oh, look at you, you communists, you betrayed us last time, and they did. The Ukrainian Black Army, led by Nestor Makhno, or Makhno, I believe is the way it's, or a better way of pronouncing it. I'm probably not even close, but they were instrumental in helping to defeat the White Army, which was the imperialist, the army that was defending the government at the time. Without Nestor Makhno's actions, it is definitely possible that the Red Army, the army led by the Bolsheviks, would have fallen, and there may never have been a Soviet Union. Then the Bolsheviki turned around and started cracking down on anarchists as being counter-revolutionary. Basically, anyone who did not adequately toe the party line was seen as an enemy. And in some cases, there's a lot of justification for that. You have the former owner class who's not too happy about all the changes going on. You can imagine something like this happening now. So, I mean, say tomorrow, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, all the biggest tech companies in the country, all the biggest industries, were all given over to the workers just like that. And all of a sudden the wealthiest people in this country had no more private property of their own. They'd be pretty pissed about that, and they wouldn't just take it lying down. They would want to launch counter-revolutionary actions, and that's precisely what happened in the budding USSR, or what would become the USSR. So there was good reason. There was a lot of enemies that were trying to crush them. I'm not sure if he's going to get into it, but the Western powers after World War II tried to come in and topple the new Bolshevik government. Or World War I, excuse me, not World War II. Tried to come in and invade Russia in the name of the former government that had been in place. And apparently it failed, but they were experiencing extreme pressures on all sides. So it seemed like they got a little bit paranoid, and they used that as justification to strengthen their own positions and more or less force the changes that they wanted to see for the proletariat, rather than, as Lenin had envisioned it, enfranchising all the workers to be part of the new worker state. So they instead took power for themselves. That's what Berkman is basically laying out here. Anything else? Okay. I mean, you studied the Russian Revolution. How does this line up with?
This is lining up exactly with what
Okay.
we read.
So
It was an interesting class because we never read any textbook. It was all fiction and poems.
oh, interesting.
As the professor felt that the artist had the best perspective on what was going on at the time.
Well, and artists can tell certain kinds of truths that you can't tell just through dry, cold hard facts.
Artists are also usually not part of the upper class, so they have an eye on the majority.
Yeah,
And they're part of the majority most of the time.
that's a good point too.
So that was...
Although they're often commissioned by the upper class, so they've kind of seen both worlds as well.
Mm-hmm.
Good points.
They know what's up.
Yeah, they know
Also,
what's up.
most artists usually aren't worth anything until they're dead.
Maybe that's why they were former government. Yeah. The oligarchy would not go down easy, that's for sure, especially since they basically control our government, says Natalie. Absolutely true as well. They would pull every single lever they could, call in every favor to every congressperson that they believe they have in their pocket through campaign donations and whatnot, and all the money that flows through our god-awful system of electoral politics.
They call Nancy Pelosi.
They would call up Nancy, and she would just throw her weight around.
Hey, Nance.
So yeah,
You give me a solid. You owe me for that one time I gave you info for insider trading.
so in a certain sense, it yeah. Yeah.
Sorry,
Right.
not sorry.
Well, I mean, she gets those tips all the time, and the thing is, it's not as though she's insider trading per se. She's just
You don't know what she does?
she's passing off, well, because it's her husband who's
Right.
making the trades. He's getting this information that, such and such company is about to be bought or about to merge or about to go under, and he just happens to make the right decision moments before it happens. So there's no direct evidence, but it's just like kind of rigging a fight. If you see it enough and you see it playing out in this way enough, you can tell it's happening, even if you can't find any sort of, you know, phantom punch or someone going down when they clearly weren't knocked out or anything like that. No, it is. I mean, it is technically illegal for her to tell him these stock tips.
No. James, it's illegal if you do it,
Well, that too, but
not if she does it.
she is not allowed to trade the stocks herself based on her insider information. She is not supposed to tell her husband, but you have to have evidence that that's going on. So there was some bill recently. I don't know the details of it that they tried to pass. I think it was like the Nancy Pelosi Act or something.
Is it
That was
really
going to try
called
and rein that in and make it illegal for spouses of sitting congresspeople to trade stocks. And I believe it got shot down. Surprise, surprise. I'm sure Nancy led that charge because she's pretty open about her being okay with having a lot of advantages from her position and you know being able to trade stock and participate in capitalism and all this stuff.
Natalie, I agree with you in the very deep recesses of my heart that she's got to go.
Oh,
I think
absolutely.
there should be term limits
Yeah, at the very least.
for
there needs to be
everybody,
term limits.
not just sitting president. Like, y'all are
Judges,
nuts.
you know, the judiciary, everybody.
Supreme Court should not have a lifelong.
No, no. If for no other reason than having a bunch of 80-year-olds decide stuff about technology that they don't even understand in the first
Right.
place and stuff like that.
Alzheimer's and dementia
is a bad
should
idea.
not be making my life decisions.
Well, we don't even need to go into that much, but like they're just not in touch with the people anymore, and so lifetime appointments makes zero sense.
I mean, maybe what they should do is when they're doing the census, look at the population and then decide, okay, we can have one judge that's over this age, we need 4 judges within this range, and 2 on the young end, right? What's she asking? Pelosi's 80.
Yeah, plus she's 80. Let's see if I can find it.
She wears the same outfit every day.
Yep, pretty much that pantsuit look. That's that white feminist girl boss sort of energy,
That's what I'm gonna wear.
where you know you basically just want to be on par with the other elite white men.
When I'm in the Senate, I'm wearing power suits.
So let's see where we're at with this. This is 8 days ago. Maybe, yeah. I don't know. I'll share the screen with y'all so you can see it too. So we'll stop. Let's see what minute we're at, just in case we lose our place. So we're at 9 minutes and 39 seconds. All right, I'll share this with y'all. Take a little side trip since this is such a short chapter. All right, let's get that out of the way. Congress moves to ban members from trading stocks as Pelosi drops opposition. After months of resisting, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has greenlighted a plan to ban members of Congress from trading stock. This is individual stock. I'm sure they could still have a what is known as a mutual fund, where you put your money into a blind trust and it's managed by a professional stock trader. The idea of keeping you separate from, you know, the goings on. I mean, even that is pretty sketchy. It's, you know, all you have to do is call up. It's like in that movie Wall Street. You call up and be like, you know, Blue Horseshoe loves Kellogg's Corporation, and then your stock trader guy knows that you want them to buy stock for you and stuff like that. And there's so many ways you can get around this, but at least give the opinion, you know, make it a little bit harder for them to manipulate the system in their favor.
Blue Horseshoe loves Kellogg's. What?
Okay, so Gordon Gekko, he had this system where he would find out inside information on trading, and he would send it to a guy to buy stock for him, so that he wasn't buying the stock directly.
Sure.
He was having someone do it. So he'd find this insider trading information, stuff that would be illegal if he then traded on that knowledge. And he would call it up and using a code. His code name was Blue Horseshoe. And he would say he loves whatever the stock is. And that stockbroker would know to buy a bunch of that stock on his behalf, and then they would split the profits or whatever from it. So it was illegal, but it's like backroom dealings.
Yeah, so
Um,
fun.
At Pelosi's direction, a House committee is drafting the rules, and the legislation is expected to be put for a vote this year. This year, wow, that's an incredible timetable considering we're in month 2 of the year. Several versions of a stock trading ban are also under consideration in the Senate, including one co-authored by Progressive Democratic Senator Elizabeth. Yeah, progressive is a pretty generous term at this point for Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts and Montana Republican Senator Steve Daines. That's about it. So, stuff is in motion. So, I think those are the key details.
The deeds.
The deets. In the Senate, several versions of the stock trading ban are under consideration, including the one co-authored. Oh, we just read that part again. 76% of voters believe that lawmakers and their spouses have an unfair advantage in the stock market. I guess those other, 24% probably have never heard of these issues.
They got their own stuff. They don't want to worry about Pelosi.
Only 5% of likely voters approve of members of Congress trading stock. Yeah.
Gee, I wonder why.
Yeah, because they're just rigging the system in their own favor. Yeah, I have a feeling the bill won't pass either. It'll quietly be killed.
Filibuster.
I mean, you can't put that out of the question either with Manchin and fucking Cinema.
Cinema Man should have be for it. Are you kidding me?
What's that? You think they would be for a stock trading ban bill?
Oh, no. Sorry. My brain is... I think it might be time for me to power down.
Ah, okay. All right, let's finish up this chapter.
Finishing by suppressing them entirely. It must be left to future historians to determine whether the Bolshevik repression of the bourgeoisie, with which they started their rule, was not merely a means toward the ulterior purpose of suppressing all other non-Bolshevik elements. For the Russian bourgeoisie was not dangerous to the revolution. As already explained, it was an insignificant minority, unorganized and powerless. The revolutionary elements, on the contrary, were a real obstacle to the dictatorship
Very
of
true,
any
Natalie.
political party. Because dictatorship would meet the strongest opposition, not from the bourgeoisie, but from the truly revolutionary classes, which consider dictatorship inimical to the best interests of the revolution, the elimination of these would therefore be of prime necessity to any political party seeking dictatorship. Such a policy, however, could not successfully begin with the suppression of the revolutionists.
But notice already that they're shifting this idea of dictatorship from what it was supposed to be, what Lenin said, a year earlier. It was supposed to be a dictatorship of the proletariat. That's what Marx conceived of it as. It was the idea of having a worker state managed by the workers themselves. Even if it was a representative form of democracy, it was directly, they would directly elect representatives that they could recall at any time. These representatives would make no more than a workman's wage doing their job to avoid the sorts of things that Pelosi gets into. So it was supposed to be a dictatorship of the proletariat, and it seems like they're moving to a dictatorship of the vanguard party, the Bolsheviki.
Would provoke the disapproval and resistance of the workers and soldiers. It would have to begin at the bourgeois end, and means found gradually to spread the net over other elements. Distrust and antagonism would have to be wakened, intolerance and persecution stimulated, popular fear created for the safety of the revolution in order to secure the people's support for an ever-widening campaign of elimination and suppression, for the introduction of the bloody hand of Red Terror into the life of the revolution. But as I
And again, that campaign of terror, as I believe it was Marx who had described it, was supposed to be to suppress any remaining bourgeois forces that would rise up against the new revolution. It was not just supposed to be against anyone who said anything bad about the revolution or opposed it in any way. It was meant specifically to suppress the old owner class, because at the beginning of a revolution, you're just a few months away from the old order. That old order doesn't just blink out of existence because there's been a revolutionary movement, and because the people that they had kept in power have now been toppled. They still have power. They still have influence. So the idea was to a campaign of terror against that until those elements had been defeated. And at the very least, at that point, the power devolves back to the people in the form of a dictatorship of the proletariat.
have said, it is the place of the future historian to determine to what extent such motives fashioned the events of those days. Here we are more concerned with what actually happened. What happened was that before long, the Bolsheviki established the exclusive dictatorship of their party.
Okay.
What was that dictatorship, you ask? And what did it achieve?
Can you do 20 more seconds? Okay. Oh, in fact, no more seconds.
This has been a production of Audible
All
Anarchy.
right. I think that's going to be it for Amanda's time tonight. Thanks for joining us for that first chapter. Appreciate your input. Did you have any closing thoughts about any of the stuff we talked about?
I feel like I was back in college and we were talking about college again.
Is that bad or good? I don't.
I mean, I'm tired, so
Okay.
that was hard.
Well, thanks for being on the show again. We'll definitely have you on whenever you feel like it.
Yeah, sorry, excuse me, very tired.
That's okay. Your job takes a lot out of you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good work, and you do a good job at it.
It's an honest day's work.
Yep.
Mama says these shoes are for running.
Oh my God. I don't know how you're trying to tie Forrest Gump into this.
I can tie Forrest Gump into anything. It's a gift.
That is one of your many talents.
Life is like a
Natalie says thanks.
Oh, of course. I hope next time I'm on, I'm a little more lively.
I'm sure she'll bring the fire next time.
What? Did you say foyer?
I meant to say fire, but I said foyer.
Oh, so you're German now?
The foyer. Oh, is that German for fire?
Yes.
Wow. Then I meant to say that, and I was just being really smart.
Good job. So now, yeah.
What commie country had thanks? What commie country had anarchy? Well, there were anarchist elements within the newly forming USSR, and then also, as I mentioned earlier, the Black Army, the Makhnovist army from Ukraine, was instrumental in defeating the White Army, which was representing the bourgeois interests in Russia. The Red Army probably would have been crushed without the efforts of the Black Army, but then after the war was over, they kind of screwed over the Black Army. So there you go. I hope that answers it. All right, let's move on to the next chapter. Let's see. Why is it not giving me?
You can find more Audible
Options.
Anarchist on YouTube.
We'll just skip ahead.
This audio production.
All right, so the dictatorship at work. So now I was going to go into the workings of the newly formed Bolsheviki dictatorship, which again, it doesn't sound like it's quite the same as the idealized version of the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Production was made in collaboration with Audible Anarchist.
What do you mean? So no anarchy in communism ever? Dictatorship ain't anarchy, right? And that's part of the problem that Alexander Berkman, the guy who's doing the audiobook, or who wrote the book that is now we're listening to as an audiobook, is pointing out that what they were supposed to have is a dictatorship of the proletariat, meaning that all workers had a more or less equal say in the way that the government ran. But because of so many pressures within Russia and from outside Russia, the Bolshevik Party, the vanguard revolutionary party, used that as justification for taking the power for themselves in order to force their vision to be set up. Communism is not at all a totalitarian system. So I don't know where you're getting that information from, but okay. Oh, Natalie says the only way I stay awake is caffeine and more caffeine, and anxiety heightened by the caffeine. So the end states of both communism and anarchy are basically the same thing: a stateless, classless, moneyless society. We've never gotten to the point of that. We've never gotten to the point of communism. We've never had full anarchy, or a full anarchist one. Stalin, Mao, Ho Chi Minh, Kim Jong-un are all totalitarians. Mao was not a totalitarian. Ho Chi Minh I haven't studied, but I don't think that's true either. Kim Jong-un, you can make more of a case that he's totalitarian, but much of the coverage of North Korea is tainted by capitalist media, so it's hard to really tell. Did you happen to read what the name? I know you've been in this chat before, so I know you know the name of this channel is Bread Theory, not Bread Practice, not Bread Let's see how things actually turned out, but Bread Theory. The whole point of this is to read theory. There are many reasons to read theory that go beyond just a history lesson. That's not the main focus of this at all. In fact, we're trying to figure out different philosophies, see how we can incorporate them into our own life, apply them to a modern context. And for myself, I know that just reading theory helps me articulate things that I've kind of had floating around in my head, but haven't really been able to put a label to. Most recently, the concept of prefiguration, and which tends to be an anarchist strategy of using the rotting shell of capitalism as shelter, and the relative stability that it provides to build up the dual power systems that we need to provide for everyone's needs, to make basically that anarchist system right now. Well, we don't have the threats of invading armies, where we don't have the threats of warlords or cartels popping up and taking over large swaths of the country or even large cities, using that relative stability as a chance to start practicing mutual aid, setting up systems of mutual aid to provide things like housing, transportation, education, food, all these sorts of things, to each other, and to start building that tradition, or that experience, I guess, of participatory democracy, where we get as many people enfranchised into the system and participating as possible. So that the term for all that is prefiguration. I didn't have a term for that, even though I had come to some of the same conclusions myself, that this is really the basis of everything, is giving everyone an equal platform to stand upon so that they can have real choice, real freedom, real agency in their lives, and real democracy in all walks of their life, all the main realms of their life that all the realms of their life that affect them the most. So by listening to theory, by reading theory, I have been able to articulate that idea better, and I've come to find that of course other people have thought of these same sorts of ideas as well, and here's their ideas that go along with that, and here's some of the ways that could play out and stuff. I think it's very important in that sense. So yeah, I focus on theory. That's the whole point, dude. what would you prefer I do? Just be like, here's how communism didn't live up to its ideals, part 77, or here's how this particular anarchist movement has never gotten past the planning and committee phase and just has devolved into infighting and canceling each other. What would be the purpose of all of that? I mean, you can make that channel if you want, but that's not really what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is ideas and helping people start to think differently, helping them at least start to dream beyond the left wall of capitalism. It seems so hard to break through in the heart of Western imperial nations, in the imperial core of the world. Education is set up against that, and just public opinion is set up against these ideas. Um, Arts and entertainment tend to be against these ideas. So I think it's important to provide a counter to that. So James says, I'm changing the coil in my tank. Burnt cotton isn't good. uh, anyway. I mean, also, we're looking at an anarchist who is critical of the Russian Revolution and saying that it did not live up to its ideals, and this is his opinion why. So he's doing exactly what you want. He's focusing on how things actually really played out. So it's very strange that you'd come in here and complain in that way, but whatever. I hope you're learning something. Um, yeah, yeah. Capitalism is our reality right now, and it's hard to escape that capitalist realist idea that this system is inevitable. It is all powerful, and we have no hope of breaking its grip. But as I always like to remind people of that Ursula K. Le Guin quote, let's pull that one up. That's always a good one. I'm sure we can find it quick. Let's find an image of it even. Let's see. Here's the one I'm looking for. Let's pull that up on the big screen. Oh, now it's going to go to the wrong one. Whoops. Pulled up the wrong one. Here we go. We'll try that once more. Not that one. Where is it? Ugh. That's annoying. Hold on one second. Oh, well. We'll move back up. I found another version of it up here somewhere. Let's see if this one will load a bigger picture. Ugh, not especially. There we go. This should be a good one. You should be able to see this one. Okay, so this is my favorite science fiction author, Ursula K. Le Guin. We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Ursula K. Le Guin. And I think that's a very important concept to keep in mind. There is no inevitable system. There is no end to history. There's no one way of doing things that will just overpower everything else. Even if we were to get to some sort of socialism, be it just a generic sort of market socialism, whether it be anarchism, communism, or something even else beyond all of that, that would not make any of that inevitable or eternal either. It would take constant vigilance to keep things right. She even wrote about this in The Dispossessed, how there's this, in the book, there's all the anarchists have been sent off to the moon, It was kind of the moon of this foreign planet. So it's not like our moon. It's more like another smaller planet that orbits this larger planet. So it has an atmosphere. It has water, but it's more desolate. But anyway, all the anarchists have been sent off there as kind of this grand bargain because they were beginning to take over political views on the home planet. So they sent them all there rather than fight them, and they created this anarchist utopia. But even there, people fell into systems of power and control over time, and things didn't last exactly as they were at the beginning, just because that's the way things go. There's no system that is forever. There's no end. Despite what the likes of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher would like to have you believe. See, even their system of neoliberalism, it is coming to a screeching halt. The wheels are beginning to fall off of it as people get left further and further behind, and we are seeing more and more that any ideas of social mobility, any ideas of a fair shake for everybody, or the ideas that we can ever be a meritocracy, and that you just get what you deserve based on your merits, all of that, even that stuff, is not true under the system that we have. Much more often, people, you can predict more than anything where someone's going to end up in their life in terms of socioeconomics based on where they start. And it's more often than not, the vast majority of people don't really change their socioeconomic status over the course of their life. And that has problems. That has big problems when so many people are struggling just to survive. So yeah. But yeah, that can make it seem as though capitalism is all powerful and undeniable. But that's not the case. These are all human systems made by people. All right, let's continue into this chapter here. Got 45 minutes left to go, so we should be okay.
Chapter 18, The Dictatorship at Work. It achieved the complete mastery of the Bolsheviki over a country of 140 millions of population in the name of the Proletariat Dictatorship. One political organization, the Communist Party, became absolute ruler of Russia. The Proletariat Dictatorship was not a dictatorship by the proletariat. Millions of people cannot all be dictators, nor can thousands of party members all be dictators.
That's not really a fair characterization of what the dictatorship of the proletariat was supposed to be. It was just supposed to be that everyone in the country had a say in the running of the government, and that the stated purpose of the government was for the people instead of for the owner class. So yeah, that's not quite fair.
By its very nature, a dictatorship is limited to a small number of persons. The less of them,
Very true,
the
Natalie.
stronger and more unified the dictatorship. In actual practice, dictatorship is always in the hands of one person, the strong man, whose will compels the consent of its nominal co-dictators.
So what I think Berkman is trying to get at here is that the idea of having a worker state that would be for the opposite purpose of a bourgeois state, what we live in now in Western democracies is a bourgeois state. It is a state that is first and foremost for the benefit of the people that own capital and in defense of that capital, whatever it may be, whatever that private means of production may be. The idea of communist revolution, of getting to socialism, is that we can turn that around and tear down the entire state and build it back up in a way that is for the benefit instead of the workers rather than the owners. In fact, they would do away with the worker-owner relationship and make all workers part owners of whatever, endeavor they were engaged in, whatever business they were a part of. So what Bergman is saying is It's basically like the an analogy would be the Lord of the Rings, like how I'm gonna forget the names and people are gonna roast me, but the one guy, was it Boromir, wanted to use the One Ring of Power against the enemy. He's like, hey, this is a very powerful thing. Let's use it against the enemy. And then I think it was Gandalf who stepped in and was like, no, 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 it is impossible. You cannot wield this power. It will corrupt you. It will turn you into the enemy. This is something that just needs to be destroyed. So that's kind of what Berkman is saying here. You cannot just turn the state. You cannot just tear down the state and then rebuild it in a way that doesn't just replicate the same structural inequalities that the current state has. You can't substitute a bourgeois state for a worker state. It just ends up being a power grab for the people in the vanguard, the people that do the toppling of the old order. I mean, he has a point. It seems like in many ways that is what happened. But to say that that's the only way that it could happen, that we can never follow things as people like Lenin laid them out, that I don't think is something that we can adequately conclude. Because we know that I mean, the USSR was the first major country to do this sort of thing. So there were a lot of problems with it. But it seems that from that point, with certain exceptions, Yugoslavia, just dissolved as a country. It was once communist, and now it is not a country at all. But by and large, the places that had these same sort of revolts and overthrows of the old order have had better results. That's not to say that any of them are perfect. China still has a fair degree of centralized control, but also they do things like they were really good at dealing with COVID. Even though it originated in China, they've only had deaths in the thousands. They have 1 billion people. The U.S., on the other hand, through its sloppy handling of lockdowns and mask mandates and vaccine mandates and all this stuff, has had almost 1 million deaths now in a country only a third the size of China. Kind of seems like there's some benefit to the way that China does things. Economically, they are wiping the floor with the U.S. Now, you might call it state capitalist, you might call it state socialist, or you might call it a mix of both. And likely it's a mix of both. There are state-owned industries, there are more private industries, but they also mandate wealth redistribution a lot better than the U.S. does. You can only rise so far. They also provide a lot of services to their people as compared to the U.S. They have high-speed rail across their entire country. We have high-speed rail nowhere. Nowhere. Our fastest train in the U.S. goes, 50 miles an hour? Maybe a little bit more. It doesn't go faster than highway speeds. It's pathetic. It's pathetic. We're supposed to be the most technologically advanced country in the world. Yet somehow China, in a couple of decades, has built thousands of miles of high-speed rail. It's absolutely ridiculous. I can hear the argument that mandates suck. What sucks more is West Virginia has a coal train. What sucks more than a mandate is allowing people to endanger each other's lives with deadly disease, just without consequence. Having no repercussions for people that just are cavalier about whether or not they endanger other people's lives. I like to use the analogy of smoking. In half the states in the United States, it has been decided at a state level that you cannot smoke in bars or restaurants or most indoor spaces anymore, or especially like public buildings, just completely out. The reason being is that even though a smoker is making decisions for their own health, right? They're not trying to endanger other people, but just by smoking, they are affecting the health of everyone else around them. So, states have by and large, I think it's up to like 26, 27 states, have decided that's not okay. That in order to protect public health, that is a greater right. The right to public health is greater than the right to negatively affect public health by your own actions, right? Yeah, the problem, James, is that people aren't doing what they need to do enough without being forced to. It's been 2 years now. People have not respected lockdowns. People have protested continuously against any sort of lockdown. We could have handled these things much differently, and most of the onus, or most of the blame, I should say, can be put on the shoulders of the government that acted very slowly, that didn't take the threat seriously, that didn't have any sort of plan in place to have an effective lockdown that didn't severely harm people economically. We could have all had, the government could have snapped its fingers and said, we're going to freeze all debt. We're not going to have any debt accumulate, no rent paid, no mortgages paid. We're going to provide food delivered to your door. This is what China did. We're going to provide food to your door for the duration of the lockdown. It could have been like a 1 month thing, a 2 month thing. I mean, the rest of the world is a wild card as well. It's not just what we do. Again, the health choices of other people affect us too, even outside this country. They could have done this sort of thing. They could have suspended all debt owed. They could have wiped out debt at the same time. I mean, while we're at it. But beyond that, they could have made it so people could have locked down without costing them, their jobs or threatened their health or any of these things. And for the few people that absolutely have to keep working, these essential workers, they could have been given government bonuses. I was an essential worker. I was all through the pandemic. I'm a delivery driver. That's essential work. I was exempt from any sort of travel restrictions in order to go to my job and deliver people packages because they really were dependent upon it. I wasn't paid a red cent more. I was given a thank you lunch a couple of times, let's say a dozen times over the course of the pandemic, which consisted of like a bologna sandwich, which I didn't eat, and like a bag of chips and a pop, or a soda for those of you who are not in the Midwest. That's it. Didn't get a pay raise over that whole time. Still haven't had a pay raise. The government could have stepped in and provided extra money for essential workers. It could have done a lot of things. The main failure is the government, more so than people that are easily taken in by, Joe Rogan or any of the conspiracy peddlers and all that stuff. The main fault is with the government and its lack of consistent and forceful reaction to a serious existential threat. We could have had deaths in the thousands, just like China, rather than almost 1 million at this point. But at this point, the way things have gone and the fact that all these governments are now caving to the pressure to open up completely, lift all sorts of restrictions, I don't know what else there is left to do about it. It just seems that people and the government are fine with people dying at this point. And it's just going to run its course. And the best we can hope for is that it turns into what the Spanish flu did and just become a seasonal, endemic, not nearly as lethal version of itself. But I don't know. The government still could act now. It still could make things difficult for people that don't take in the health and lives of their fellow citizens into consideration. They can make it harder for these people. Right. Yeah, they could have not charged for utilities. They could have just said, okay, all the things you need to live, we're going to have special rules. They could even made special rules that just would last for the duration of the pandemic. And they could have provided all those things and then gone back to normal. Would have been great. Yeah, well, I mean, there's the current of hyper individualism in the U.S. and many Western countries that I think is just toxic and against humanity. It is antisocial. That you're right that people have these knee jerk reactions that, oh, you're going to tell me not to do anything? I'm going to do the opposite. That's such a baby way of thinking. That's what toddlers do. That's not, and the reason toddlers do that is because they can't comprehend the world outside of themselves. They're just by nature very self-centered because they just haven't had the experience and the emotional development to really consider other people all that much. And it appears that some people never get beyond that point. Then they swallow all the lines of freedom and, you're only free if you do whatever the hell you want, whenever you want. But mandates do work, though. They showed that when there were restrictions, when they had for a limited time restrictions on like federal employees, that meant you can't tell me not to let to sneeze on my neighbor. That made vaccination rates go way up. The more mandates they had, the more vaccinations went up. People got with the program. The government could have, from the beginning, put out a PR campaign. Care about your neighbor. We're all in this together. Together we can get through this. Make it about caring about your fellow man. But even that was not there. And I mean, Trump is to blame for a lot of that, for sure. Never wanted to take any blame for everything. He's the epitome of the selfish hyper individual. Never at fault for anything. It's always somebody else. So he would downplay numbers. He would promote quack science. He was horrible through it. But it's not as though Joe Biden has been great either. He's not even been the bare minimum. He sucked at it too. He just hasn't been as actively harmful. That's such an incredibly low bar, but that's where we're at in American politics. But that's enough of that sidebar. Let's get back into the book because I do want to finish it before my hour is up here. Or finish this chapter.
It cannot be otherwise. And so it was with the Bolsheviki. The real dictator was neither the proletariat nor even the communist.
James, you can say whatever you want about Biden or Trump as long as you don't use slurs that are against Twitch TOS. So as long as you're not using slurs for any, immutable characteristic of a people, knock yourself out. You can say whatever you want.
Communist Party. Theoretically, the power was held by the Central Committee of the party, but actually was wielded by the inner circle of that committee, called the Political Bureau, or Politburo. But even the Politburo was not the real dictator, though its membership was less than a score. For in the Politburo, there were differing views on every important question, as there must be when there are many leads.
Yeah, this is not even a Let's Go Brandon stream. You can say fuck Joe Biden. It's okay. we don't have to come up with convoluted ways to swear by not swearing. Natalie says the price of food is really hurting on what I can afford to buy or pass on, and I'm sure many feel the same. Absolutely. And I'm so sorry to hear you're struggling that way. No one should ever have to struggle with food. We live in a country that 40% of food goes to waste, much of it at the farm itself because they can't get the right price. So there's no point in even hiring someone to distribute and process or deliver it because they can't get enough to even make that worthwhile. So they end up dumping it. It's really horrible. But this is what you get with the profit motive. If instead the government were to swoop in those cases and, put money towards collecting up food when the prices weren't good enough, it would at least not be wasted. They could take it to, food shelves or whatever. They could distribute it in one way or another. But they choose not to. And that's it. They choose not to.
The real dictator was the man whose influence secured the support of the majority of the Politburo. that man was Lenin, and it was he who was the real proletarian dictatorship, just as Mussolini, for instance, and not the
Oh,
fascist party, is dictator in Italy.
I seriously do not like that comparison. You know, as 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 many failings as any of these leaders of the early USSR had, it's absolutely not fair to compare them to fascism. That's absolutely ridiculous. Um, I mean, just look at the way that Khrushchev and the Soviet Union supported Cuba when it had its revolution. Um, those are not the actions of a cold, heartless, brutal dictator. Uh, yeah, that's not a fair comparison. I do not stand by his statement here.
It was always the views and ideas of Lenin that were carried out, from the very inception of the Bolshevik Party to the last day of Lenin's life. Carried out when the entire committee was opposed to his opinion, and even when the Central Committee bitterly fought his proposals.
That's also very true, James. It's big retail letting it go to waste because if they discount it, they owe the seller the full price. Yep, yep. And going in with that, it's things like sell by dates and best by dates that people take as throw it out past this date, otherwise you're risking food poisoning. That does lead to a hell of a lot of waste. And if instead they didn't have any sort of date like that, even an expiration date, just smell test. We have developed smell. We have evolved the sense of smelling rotten food over millennia, over probably millions of years, for that very purpose. And there's no reason that we should not rely on that as a good standard now. We can see mold, we can smell rot. Um, those are always okay measures to go by. So, well, pretty much always, as long as you're keeping the food in a safe place. Well, I'll say that. Um, but instead, they put freshness dates and stuff like that, and people just toss it if it gets beyond that point because they think they're not being safe. But back to the book.
On their first presentation, it was Lenin who always won. His will that prevailed. It was so in every critical period of Bolshevik history. It could not help being so, because dictatorship always means domination by the strongest personality, the supremacy of a single will. The whole history of the Communist Party,
Good point.
as that of every dictatorship, indisputably demonstrates this. Bolshevik writings themselves prove it. Here is sufficient to mention but a few of the most vital elements to substantiate my contention. In March 1917, when Lenin returned home from exile in Switzerland, the Central Committee of his party in Russia had decided to enter the coalition government formed after the abolition of the Tsarist regime. Lenin was opposed to cooperation with the bourgeois and Mensheviki who were in the government, yet notwithstanding that the party had already decided the question and that Lenin was almost alone in his opposition, his influence carried. The Central Committee reversed itself and took up Lenin's position. Later, in July 1917, Lenin advocated for an immediate revolution against the Kerensky government. His proposal was roundly condemned, even by his nearest comrades and friends, as foolhardy and criminal. But again Lenin won, even at the cost of Zhivkov, Kamenev, and other influential Bolsheviki refusing to be parties to the scheme and resigning from the Central Committee. Incidentally,
You bring up a good point too, James. I know we keep getting away from the book itself and keep talking about food, but that's another important component of it is that a lot of these municipalities have, or it could be a state level or whatever, have laws or rules against just giving away food that's about to spoil because of liability reasons, which is ridiculous. There's, you know what, we should watch sometime the documentary on dumpster diving. It's a pretty good one. Or there's probably many of them, but I saw one that was really good. But there's tons of food that is perfectly safe, perfectly fine to eat, that just is coming up close to its sell by date. and stores just throw it out. But there needs to be a real system in place where when it gets to a certain point that they don't want to have it in the store anymore, they can give it to a food shelf that's, if it needs to be refrigerated, they have a refrigerated truck that they can drive up. It needs to be frozen, and they can do the same. And they can just take it as it is. If it's like cans or whatever, just take it away. But if there was that sort of a system in place that could then get that food out to the people very quickly, even incorporate it into food and have uh, public potlucks or some sort of thing like that, or do like what Food Not Bombs does. They often get their food from stores. But yeah, there needs to be more of a government buy-in to the idea of saving food and distributing it to people that need it, because there's tons of food that just flows through the system for no reason. It just goes from growing to harvesting to packaging and shipping and sitting on the shelves, all just to be thrown in the dumpster. Can't think of a bigger waste than that.
The putsch, the attempt to upset Kerensky, proved a failure and cost many workers' lives. The Red Terror instituted by Lenin as soon as he came to power after the October Revolution was bitterly denounced by his co-workers as entirely uncalled for and as a direct betrayal of the revolution. But in spite of official protests of the most active and influential members of the party, Lenin had his way. During the Brest-Litovsk negotiations, it was again Lenin who insisted that peace on any terms be made with Germany, while Trotsky, Radek, and other important Bolshevik leaders opposed the Kaiser's conditions as humiliating and destructive. Once more, Lenin scored. The new economic policy, the NEP, submitted by Lenin to his party during the Kronstadt events, was fought by the Central Committee as nullifying all revolutionary achievements and as a death blow to communism. It was indeed a complete reversal of everything the revolution stood for, and a return to the very conditions that the Great October change had abolished. But Lenin's will again prevailed, and his resolution was carried by the Ninth Communist Congress held in Moscow in March 1921. As you see, the alleged dictatorship of the proletariat was only the dictatorship of Lenin. He dictated to the Politburo to the Central Committee to the party to the proletariat and the rest of the people. Russia.
So obviously he doesn't have a very high view of Lenin. He views the process as having gone very top down, which is completely anathema to the way that Lenin had laid things out in State and Revolution, which you can go back and look in the archives of my videos. We went through the whole thing. Much of it with For We Are Many. Great show. Also on the Left Signal Boost TV collective. So Lenin had conceived of things as being bottom up, where there would be a representative form of government at the lowest level, the village, the neighborhood, the district, whatever it may be. The people directly elect a representative. That representative represents them on the citywide level or the countywide level or whatever. And then there are representatives that go up to the national level. And any of those representatives could be recalled by the people at the bottom at any time. But by Berkman's account here, it appears as though the exact opposite has happened. And remember, it's just one man's account, so it's not the be-all, end-all. But as he is presenting it, it's pretty damning that for whatever reason, and you could assign malice to it, but I think more likely it's the Revolutionary Party, the Bolsheviks, did not believe that they could give up power at that point. They found themselves in a position where they didn't feel they could give up power. And for better or worse, justified retaining all the power for themselves because of that.
Counted a population of over 100 millions. The Communist Party had less than 50,000 members. The Central Committee consisted of
Hi,
several
John.
score.
How you doing
The
tonight?
Politburo numbered about a dozen, and Lenin was one. But that was the proletarian dictatorship. Russia is a country of vast extent, spread over half.
Yep, and you're right, John. That this is the justification that they're giving. Whether you can choose to believe their motives or not, but the justification was that yes, they needed to be at the beginning a top-down structure to fend off enemies of the revolution who would seek to undermine and undo it. So I'm more inclined to believe that that's at least what they felt in their hearts they were doing. Whether they went a little bit too far in that and never quite got to the part where they, should have been able to give power back to the people. I don't know. But it's definitely a possibility.
Of Europe and a goodly part of Asia. It is peopled by numerous races and nationalities speaking different languages, with diversified psychology, varied interests, and outlook on life.
And that's a good point, too. Things seem to, by all accounts, things seem to have been a lot better, a lot more progressive in the beginning of the USSR when it was still under Lenin. And it would have been incredible to see how things went had he not died at such an untimely time. Untimely time, that sounds like a strange turn of phrase, but he died very early on into the USSR. Would have been interesting to see how things went had he maintained control. Because, yes, it does seem Stalin tightened things down considerably and rolled back a lot of the gains for things like LGBTQIA equality, for women's rights, for a lot of stuff. And he was just he would just murder anyone who he felt opposed him. So, for your average person, that probably doesn't mean a whole lot. I mean, at least I don't think so. I haven't studied Stalin that closely, but I'm imagining these are more like his political opponents. So for those people, not so great. The idea that he's just purposely slaughtering millions, I think, is a stretch. People like to point to the famine that happened under his reign, but it's a famine. And again, you can much more easily ascribe it to incompetence than malice, that the Soviet planners just didn't know enough about good agricultural practices, even for their time. And that led to a famine rather than Stalin purposely trying to starve people. Very true, John. Opinions and theory, like leaders, change, and outside influences play a major role. Yep. And that's one of the difficulties in trying to look at any of this objectively, is that so much of what is out there, what has been written about the USSR and the Russian Revolution, has come from an unsympathetic lens from Western writers. So they're going to go out of their way to paint it as in as bad a light as possible, to ascribe the worst motives to everybody, and you know, kind of by default, or by doing so, prop up the capitalist system instead. So it's very murky. It's a difficult thing to look into, but we're trying our best. I do really need to get going with this chapter, though, because I do want to finish it on time.
We know what the dictatorship of the Tsars did to the country. Let us now see what the proletarian dictatorship accomplished. Today, after over a decade of Bolshevik rule in Russia, we can form a fair estimate of its effects and examine the results it achieved. Let us sum them up.
Right.
Politically, the aim of the revolution was to abolish government tyranny and oppression and make the people free. The Bolshevik government is admittedly the worst despotism in Europe, with the sole exception of fascist rule in Italy. The citizen has no rights to which the government feels bound to respect. The Communist Party is a political monopoly with all.
It should be noted, too, that this was written, I believe, in 1927 or thereabouts. So this is before Hitler's reign, which is why he said, except for the fascists in Italy, because at that point, they were the only fascists so far.
All other parties and movements outlawed. Security of person and domicile is unknown. Freedom of speech and press does not exist. Even within the party, the least difference of opinion is suppressed and punished by imprisonment and exile, as witnessed the fate of Trotsky and his followers of the opposition. Independent opinion is not tolerated. The GPU, the secret service formerly called the Chechka, is a super government with unlimited arbitrary powers over the liberty and lives of the people. Only those who are entirely on the side of the dominant party clique enjoy freedom and privileges. But such liberty is to be had under the worst despotism. If you have nothing to say, you are perfectly free to say it, even in the land of Mussolini. As a prominent member of a recent Communist Congress put it, there is room for all political parties in Russia. The Communist Party is in the government, the others are in prison. Economically, it was the fundamental
The
aim
reader
of
had
the
to laugh
revolution
there.
to abolish capitalism and establish communism and equality. The Bolshevik dictatorship began by instituting a system of unequal compensation and discriminating rewards, and ending by reintroducing capitalistic ownership after it had been abolished by the direct action of the industrial and agrarian proletariat. Today, Russia is a country partly state capitalistic and partly privately capitalistic. The dictatorship and the Red Terror, by which it was maintained, proved the main factors in paralyzing the economic life of the country. High-handed Bolshevik rule antagonized the people. Its despotism embittered the masses. The repression of every independent effort alienated the best elements from the revolution and made them feel that it had become the private concern of the political party in power. Facing a new tyranny instead of the longed-for liberty, the workers became discouraged. They felt their revolutionary achievements taken from them and used as a weapon against themselves and their aspirations. The proletarian saw his factory committee subjugated to the dictates of the Communist Party and made helpless to protect his interests as
That's a fair point, John. You say overall Russia has changed for the better, having had communism. I would say that's true. I mean, the world's better than when they had a czar, that's for sure. And that was only slightly before the October Revolution. So just that alone, communism was huge. I don't think it's even fair to call it communism because they never really achieved that. But a type of socialism. It might be states. You might call it state socialism. You might call it state capitalism. But regardless, definitely a lot better for most people. I mean, they had a tremendous technological advancement. And you're right, the U.S. did have a major competitor that probably did spur on some of its developments. Certainly in regards to like the space race. Yeah, and that's how Berkman characterizes as a mix of. He just said it's a mix of state capitalism and private capitalism, which is more or less what you might be able to fairly characterize China as today. So the key there in making it state capitalist versus state socialist, in my mind, is how much control do the people actually have over their government. If they have a fair degree of control, then you might call it state socialism. If they don't, then yeah, it is still, in my estimation, better than private capitalism, but you're still having most of the benefits for the people that, as Berkman was just saying, are the party elites and their hangers-on and friends and whatnot. So yeah. an interesting analysis either way.
As a toiler, his labor union became the mouthpiece and transmitter of Bolshevik orders, and he found himself deprived of all voice, not only in the management of industry, but even in his own factory, where he was kept at work long hours at the poorest pay. The toilers soon realized that the revolution had been taken out of their hands, that their Soviets had been emasculated of all power, and that the country was being ruled by some people far away in the Kremlin, just as it had been in the days of the Tsars. Eliminated from revolutionary and creative activity, living only to obey the new masters, constantly harassed by the Bolsheviki and Chekists, and ever in fear of prison or execution for the least expression of protest, the worker became embittered against the revolution. He deserted the factory and sought the village where he might be furthest removed from the dreaded rulers and at least secure for his daily bread. Thus broke down the industries of the country. The peasants saw leather-clad and armed communists descend upon his quiet village, despoil it of his fruit of his hard labor, and treat him with brutality and insolence of the old Tsarist officials. He saw his Soviet dominated by some lazy, good-for-nothing village loafer calling himself Bolshevik and holding power from Moscow. He had willingly, even generously, given his wheat and corn to feed the workers and soldiers, but saw his provisions lie rotting at the railroad stations and in the warehouses, because the Bolsheviki could not themselves manage things and would let no one else do it. He knew that his brothers in the factory and in the army suffered for lack of food because of communist insufficiency, bureaucracy, and corruption. He understood why more was always demanded of him. He saw his few possessions, his own family provisions, confiscated by Chekists, who even took his last horse, without which the peasant could neither work nor live. He saw his neighbor villages that rebelled against these outrages leveled to the ground, and the peasants whipped and shot, just as in the old days. He turned against his revolution, and in his desperation he determined to plant and sow no more that he needed for himself and his family, and to hide even that in the forest. Such were the results of the dictatorship, of Lenin's military communism.
I would tend to agree, John. This is why you don't smash the system, because, yeah, that leaves a huge power vacuum in which opportunists can grab power. Sounds like some amount of that happened. How you going to take a dude to the last horse? Yeah. Yeah. And also the people themselves haven't necessarily... I mean, boy, I got a tickle in my throat. Excuse me. Becomes chaos, yeah. And also, remember that the people a year before the October Revolution were living under a czar. So they went from having absolutely no agency in their entire life to having a little bit to supposedly having a lot. But in that time, they wouldn't have had the time to really get up to speed on all the political theory, or at least a lot of people would not have. It's the reason I prefer prefiguration. Use the time we have now to get people used to working together in systems of mutual aid, and then, if and when the time comes for a new system, everyone's ready, everyone has a history, and people are less likely to be able to be fooled by, strong men coming in with big promises. I really got to finish this chapter, though. We're going to be over just a little bit.
Bolshevik methods. Industry
We don't
stood
get
still,
going.
and famine overwhelmed the country. The general suffering, the bitterness of the workers, the peasant uprisings began to threaten the very existence of the Bolshevik regime. To save the dictatorship, Lenin needed to introduce a new economic policy, known as the NEP. The purpose of the NEP, also known as the NEP, was to revive the economic life of the country. It was to encourage greater production by the peasantry by allowing them to sell their surplus instead of having it forcibly confiscated by the government. It was also to enable exchanges of products by legalizing trade and reviving the cooperatives formerly suppressed as counter-revolutionary. But the determination of the Communist Party to hold on to its dictatorship made all these economic reforms ineffectual, because industry cannot develop under a despotic regime. Economic growth, as well as trade and commerce, requires security of person and property, a certain amount of freedom and non-interference in order to function. But dictatorship does not permit that freedom. Its guarantees cannot inspire confidence. Hence, the new economic policy has not produced the results desired, and Russia remains in the throes of poverty, constantly on the brink of economic disaster. Industrially, the dictatorship has emasculated the revolution of its basic purpose of placing production in the hands of the proletariat and making the worker independent of economic masters. The dictatorship merely changed masters. The government has become the boss instead of the individual capitalist, though the latter is now also developing a new class in Russia. The toiler has remained dependent as before, in fact, more so. His labor organizations have been deprived of all power, and he has lost even the right to strike against his governmental employer. Since the workers as a class wield the dictatorship, the communists argue, they cannot strike against themselves. Accordingly, the proletarians in Russia pay themselves wages that are not sufficient for bare existence, live in crowded, unhygienic quarters, work under the most unsanitary conditions, endanger their health and lives because of the lack of industrial protection and safety, and arrest and imprison themselves for an expression of discontent. Culturally, the Bolshevik regime is a training school in communism and party fanaticism, with no access to ideas differing from the views of the dominant clique. It is the rearing of an entire people in the dogmas of a political church, with no opportunity to broaden and cultivate the mind outside the circle of opinions permitted by the ruling class. No press exists in Russia except the official communist publications, and such others that are approved by the Bolshevik censor. No public sentiment can find expression there, since government has a monopoly on speech, press, and assembly. It is no exaggeration to say that there is less freedom of opinion and opportunity to voice it under the Bolshevik dictatorship than there had been under the Tsars. When Russia was ruled by the Romanovs, you could at least secretly issue pamphlets and books, since the government then had no monopoly on the paper supply and printing presses. These were in private hands, and the revolutionists could always find a way to use them for propaganda. Today in Russia, all the means of publication and distribution are in the exclusive possession of the government, and no person can express his views to the public unless he first secures Bolshevik permission. Thousands of illegal publications had been issued by the revolutionary parties during the autocratic Romanov regime. Under communist rule, such a happening is most exceptional, as witness the indignant amazement of the Bolsheviki when it was discovered that Trotsky had succeeded in publishing the platform of the opposition element in the party. Socially, Bolshevik Russia, 10 years after the revolution, is a country where no man can enjoy his political security or economic independence, where the hidden hand of the GPU is always at work, terrorizing the people by sudden night searches, arrests for no cause, secret denunciation for alleged counter-revolution out of personal revenge, imprisonment without hearing or trial, and year-long exile to the frozen north of Siberia or to the wastes of Western Asia. A huge prison where equality means the fear of all alike, and freedom signifies unquestioning submission to the powers that be. Morally, Russia represents the struggle of the finer qualities of man against the degrading and corrupting elements of a system built on coercion and intimidation. The revolution brought the best instincts of man to the fore: his manhood, his consciousness of human value, his love of liberty and justice. The revolutionary atmosphere inspired and cultivated these tendencies lying dormant in the people, particularly in the feeling against oppression, the hunger for freedom, the spirit of mutual helpfulness and cooperation. But the dictatorship has had the effect of counteracting these traits, arousing instead fear and hatred, the spirit of intolerance and persecution. Bolshevik methods have systematically weakened the people's morale, have encouraged servility and hypocrisy, have created disillusionment and distrust, have developed an atmosphere of time-serving, now dominant in Russia. Such is the situation today in that unhappy land. Such the effects of that Bolshevik idea that you can make people free by compulsion, the dogma that dictatorship can lead to liberty. So you think the Russian Revolution failed because of dictatorship, you ask? Was not Russia too backward to make a success of it? It failed because of Bolshevik ideas and methods. The Russian masses were not too backward to abolish the Tsar, to defeat the provisional government, to destroy capitalism and the wage system, to turn the land over to the peasantry and the industries to the workers. So far, the revolution was the greatest success, and the people were beginning to build a new life built upon the foundation of equal liberty, opportunity, and justice. But the moment a political party usurped the reins of government and proclaimed its dictatorship, disastrous results were inevitable. Revolution, when it comes, must deal with the conditions as it finds them. It is the means and methods used, and the purpose for which they are used, that are vital. Upon them depends the course and fate of the revolution. Let us learn this lesson well, because the fate of revolution depends on it. You shall reap what you sow is the acme of all human wisdom and experience.
Okay.
This has been a production of Audible Anarchist. You can find more Audible Anarchist on YouTube.
So there you have it. That's the end of chapter 18. So I guess to summarize, he basically is saying that when a revolution relies too heavily on a particular group of elites to come in, overthrow the current power structure, and then set things up for themselves, there's too much temptation to keep the power for themselves through whatever justification they can find. And there was plenty of justification to go around. There were tons of enemies trying to overthrow the new revolution. But basically, you can't rely on a small group of people to wield power, because it will. I mean, Berkman thinks it corrupted them. It may be that they felt they were acting in the best interest of the people, but it does seem that where the power should have at some point gone back to the people, there was excuses and justifications made to not let it be so. So John says we need to build social capitalism from the ground up to replace predatory corporations, and use revolution for increased wages and nationalized healthcare. But people must change their level of interdependence through awareness and education to include the realization that no one is an island. That's true. Able to meet their own needs. All need the right to say no and the ability to move on without their needs, not being dependent on blind service to the evils of forced exploitation. I agree with that. I differ a little bit with the idea that we need to build social capitalism, unless by that you mean like worker-owned cooperatives. Is that what you mean? Because yeah, that can be definitely a good part of the strategy. I don't think it has. It can't be the end all be all. We don't just get socialism just by changing the economic relationship of worker and owner to be, to fuse it into one and the same. That's a big step forward. Yeah, worker-owned cooperatives. Okay, I'm mostly on board with. I mean, I am on board with that part of it. I think, in addition, as you mentioned, people have to be able to get the things they need. So, for that section of it, I think we need to set up ourselves amongst our own communities systems of mutual aid to give food, housing, education, uh, transportation, community access, all these sorts of things. So the essential part of liberating people is giving them a platform to stand on where they can make choices, about where they work, about how they participate politically, how much they participate in any of these systems, how they relate to one another interpersonally. Everyone has to have a platform. So I think that has to be a component of it too. Worker-owned cooperatives, a great step forward, but I don't think it can be the end-all, be-all. Yeah, right. And I don't think that smashing the system is necessarily the best way to go forward. I mean, if we were to do away with capitalism tomorrow, there would be a lot of chaos. It would completely destroy our supply line systems. People would starve. People would freeze. It would not be good. Um, but even having any sort of armed insurrection and revolution has its own problems. I mean, not least of which, it's very unlikely that a significant portion of the military and the local police forces would be on the same side as any sort of leftist revolution. Especially the police force tends to be very right wing in the US. So that just seems like a non starter to me. I think the only thing to do is just like a peaceful sort of weaning ourselves from being dependent on corporations for giving, or on capitalism for giving us jobs and all the things that come with the money that they're providing. So the basics of life. We need to do that for ourselves locally, interdependently, through systems of mutual aid that foster solidarity, not charity, not means-based testing, recognizing that everyone deserves these things, regardless of where they're at in their life or where they come from. All right. That's going to have to do it for tonight. I'm over my time. I do apologize to Amanda if you're watching this later on. Thank you very much to my patrons, John T. and Mike E. If you would like to become a patron, let me pull up the thing right now. There it is. You can go to patreon.com/bread_theory, support the stream, help you make this more of a job rather than just a hobby. Making it more of a job means I can put out more content. We can get through many, many books. Made through quite a few in the last year, but we could do at least twice as many if it became more of a even a part-time thing. Would be amazing. So, but that only happens with the support of viewers like you. So I do appreciate the support I've had. Thank you for the people that have subscribed or that have subbed on Twitch. That's another way you can do it. But if you don't want to give Bezos money, the best way to do it is on Patreon. That's the best way you can support. We're going to raid into Feminist Critique. It's been a while since we've done them. So we will do them again. We will raid into them again tonight. What are they talking about? A lot to say tonight. So that's a vague title, but they're always a good time. It's a lot of fun, and you learn cool things. Thanks for being a part of the chat, everybody. I really appreciate your input. And now we'll start the raid. And I will see you all at the very least this Friday for some more S.J. Witcher stuff. Yeah, hasn't been the most popular series yet, but it's starting to build up a little bit of steam. If you like leftist politics and video games, that's the place to be. Look for that. And definitely go to facebook.com. Oh, it's down at the bottom now. Go to facebook.com/leftsignalboost. And you can be alerted to when all these videos go live. If that's a platform that you use a lot. And we're also creating a live stream and video creator commune. It's kind of like a commune. A collective. I'll just call it a collective for now. So yeah, here goes the raid. Let me just start it up now. See y'all next time. Thanks for being here. That's fine.